we think our memory is bad, or we think that our ability to focus is bad. We're just literally addicted to distraction.
Could the biggest transformations of your life come from being in the dark for 5 days with no cell phone, no talking, and no distractions? Well, I've been through some amazing transformational experiences, but when I heard about dark retreats, where you're basically in the dark for anywhere from 3 to 7 days all alone, I had to learn more. I want to get into the tactics and like what you were doing during that week, because there's a lot to unpack there. Did you ever get to the point you're like, I need out? It's enough. I'm done.
I got to that point. So your brain naturally produces DMT in this experience, and typically it happens on the third day is what they say.
So today I have a friend who did exactly that, and he's going to share what it's like to be locked away in the dark, and the profound realizations he's had and how it's changed his life. All right, guys, welcome to today's episode on Real Influence. I have a good friend here, Matt Stafford. And the reason why Matthew's on today's podcast is because, as you know, I love different life experiences. And Matthew and I met at a recent event, and he was telling me about something he was going to go experience. And I was like, I have to follow up with how this went. So we're going to get into all of that, as well as some business things and what Matthew's been up to. But Matthew, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited. Today is something that not a lot of people have done. Is, you know, like what you've done is pretty unique. And I've done a lot of different things. I've heard about different things. And when I hear new things, I'm like, what is that? I want to know more. So we're going to unpack all of that stuff. But before we get started, just tell us something interesting about yourself that might not be like socially aware if you were to search you today.
Well, I would say I'm a little bit of an adrenaline junkie. I have 499 skydives. And probably I had a scary one, like jump 4 and then on jump 14. And so most people probably thought I wouldn't keep going, but I kept going, and I'm really glad I did.
And like you're so calm. I would expect an adrenaline junkie to just be like white knuckling the mic and like super aggressive, and you're just like totally calm. Has that always been the case with you, or is that something new?
No, I think I'm pretty laid back, but maybe that's probably what's kept me alive, because I've been in a lot of scary situations with that, but I tend to not panic until I process it afterwards.
That's a good skill to have.
Yeah.
And so a little bit of background on yourself. I mean, you've been in business for the better part of almost 3 decades, right? In different type of businesses. What was like your starting point in your career? And then what led you to the new kind of traditional or non-traditional career paths you've taken?
I've never wanted to work for anyone else. I had a job, and that guy gave me an opportunity to take over his business. And I did that right out of high school. I went to 2 years of college, but for architectural drafting. But the guy that I was working for said that he would sell me his business, and he did that on a land contract. And so I bought it. And I've just always believed in myself and that I was going to be able to figure it out. And that's worked really well. And it's also backfired several times, when I guess if I had it to do all over again, I would say, just a word of advice, is that I would put more emphasis on getting good mentors and not having to figure it all out myself. So a lot of times I've done that and seemed to learn the hard way. But I think that through that 30 years of journey, as I'm getting wiser, or not necessarily believing that I'm the magic sauce in every scenario, because I'm also the thing that I'm the common denominator of why it didn't work too.
What's your approach at finding a mentor or a coach, especially early on? Like, how do you identify somebody who's there to actually serve you versus just sell you?
That is a great question. I think the ones who've made the most impact, you know it right away. Like It feels differently. It feels different. The ones that have been instrumental in me making change, it's always about me. It's not about them. So I guess when you're trying to vet that out, is it about them trying to sell you on their accolades, or is it actually them just like leaning in and providing some value? Because those are the ones that I have are the long-standing good relationships, is where they leaned in, provided some value, and then it's an exchange back and forth sense.
Yeah, I think that's and that was like a pretty big question to open up with. I guess I should have waited for that or prefaced you before the interview. Okay. And like, I mean, I've had coaches where it didn't work out, but it all worked out in the end because it led me to the next coach. Like, had I not went through this bad experience, I wouldn't have known what a good experience was. So I think there is a bit of experiments that go with this. And it just kind of relates to like what influences are out there and how do you judge good influence over bad influence. And one of the things that, especially in business, that I'm noticing, people that are leveling up in the business capacity is very much related to how they're growing as a person. And, you know, what we're going to talk about today, I think, probably has some sort of correlation between who you want to become as a person, but it's also translated into how you do business because you're operating from a different level. What led you down the path of like getting into some of these experiences that we're going to talk about today? Like, what was some of the first things that you got turned on to by a mentor or a coach or a friend that you're like, oh, that sounds cool, I want to try that, whether it was like a spiritual journey or just some sort of experience that you've never had?
There's like two different experiences that I would say started me down that path. Because before then, I had a pretty traumatic childhood. And so I think I was a lot more in my head than I would like to have thought I was, and didn't realize that. The lack of being able to feel has been a huge discovery for me over the last 4 or 5 years. Instead of just think my feelings, now I feel my feelings. And where I would try to figure it out to be okay instead of feel my way through the process. And so I would say, yeah, my very first experience where I realized something was locked up was a friend of mine said, hey, we're doing a retreat in Costa Rica. And we had done business together for 4 or 5 years. He was a really good client, and I trusted him from multiple aspects. And he said, we're going to do ayahuasca. And up until that point, I don't drink. I don't do very much stuff, or I don't drink to the point of like getting a buzz or whatever. So I'm
Excess, blackouts.
yeah. No, I'm pretty low key when it comes to that stuff. And so I had never even considered doing that or trying that. But because of who it was that asked me, I'm like, yeah, I'll go. And so it was a 7-day retreat. We went and we ended up doing ayahuasca 3 times over that 7 days, and eating organic and journaling and a bunch of other stuff. And I wouldn't say that, well, yeah, it was life changing. Not from like I had an epiphany then that's never been the same, but it was like I realized that I was a lot more protected and guarded than what I had realized. I thought I was more open than how I was. And several things over the last couple of years have kind of revealed that, because I've had people say, oh, you're very nice, but you're intimidating. And I never understood that. And I almost kind of like, it hurt me. But what I realized was, as I continue to uncover these things, my particular belief from my trauma was that I'm the only safe place for me. So when people would try to get close, or I would be nice, internally, there was a place in me that wouldn't let them. And I think when I resolved that, people stopped telling me that. In fact, actually, people started to say, oh, I feel very safe around you, which was exactly what I had never felt in my own life. So it's kind of like the pain that we feel can turn into the purpose that we give other people, or how we serve others. And I would say that experience was the start. And then the next one that I think had a bigger impact was I went to an emotional intelligence training that was like spread out over 3 different weekends. And one of the experiences in it was that we had to act out our mother and our father.
Oh, wow.
And up until this point, I was 48 when I did this. Yeah, 48 years old when I did this. I had always thought that the reason why I struggled in relationships and to get close was because my dad was abusive. And so I always thought like, oh, well, I'm not angry. I'm not physical. I'm not any of these things. I can just be nice and it will get better. And I won't feel broken. And what I realized was I acted out my dad, and I had some anger or whatever and pretended that. And then I got to where I had to act out my mom. And the lady that was sitting across from me, the nicest, sweetest lady that I could have ever asked for the experience. And I walked up to her to act out my mom. And I remember like clear as day, there was a wall about 3 feet behind me. And I turned around and walked over to the wall and looked at the wall. And I mean, and this is the story that was playing in my head, or the voice that was playing in my head. I was like, that's weird. My mom never hit me. And then I said, oh, and my mom never played with me. My mom never took us to school. My mom never anything. She was like emotionally checked out, probably with what she was dealing with and what she was witnessing with us. And that was the moment that I realized, oh, okay, I've been looking in the wrong spot my whole life. And that's why I haven't figured it out. And so now the journey over the last 4 years it's really been super magical. And yeah, I feel like it keeps getting better and better. So there's nothing preventing me from continuing to go down these experiences like what you and I are about to talk about. And there's a lot of truth to, we don't see the world the way it is. We see the world the way we believe it is. And the more that I unwind my beliefs and what I thought was true, the more I realize like, oh, I just see what I believe. I don't necessarily see things for the way that they are. And I realize that more now than ever after the retreat that I went to down in Mexico.
Man, you dropped so much like gold along the way. I didn't make a bunch of notes, but there's a couple things pop back in my mind, which was the way we perceive the world is very much dictated upon what our perception's built upon in terms of experience. So I always have this story of my mom where she calls herself a klutz because she like drops a glass, but like another person could drop a glass and never associate to being a klutz. And it's just because she's built that pattern of evidence in her life and she's associating now that she is that person. And it's not the case. Like people drop things, people do things like that. And it doesn't mean that you're that type of person. But the other thing you mentioned, I wanted to kind of double click and circle back on was you said that you used to think the way you felt, but you didn't actually feel it. How have you, and how could somebody start to make the distinction between those? Because I think those are powerful in terms of actually feeling it and something I've struggled with. So I know you did a few exercises when we were at David Bayer's mastermind with people on stage. I thought it was cool because if you never identified that, it's a pretty profound difference in thinking it versus feeling it.
Yeah. So I literally help people do that every week now. The distinction for me is in the way that you can tell, if you ask yourself a feeling and you try to give a story as to what you're feeling, then you're not actually feeling it. You're thinking it. So an example would be, I ask you a question and you said, oh, I'm angry. It makes me remember my mom calling me a klutz or whatever, just making something up. And I would say, okay, that's a story. Where do you feel anger in your body? And so then you would go to where you feel anger, and anger can be warm or cold or feel like a shape or a weight, things like that. When you're actually describing a feeling, then you're feeling it, or you couldn't describe it. When you're describing a story, you're literally sharing thoughts. You're not feeling the feeling. And the reason why that's so prevalent is because most of us are taught from a very young age that our feeling, or to have feelings, is not okay. Like if we're crying, they try to make us stop crying right away, instead of like actually crying is okay and expressing an emotion is okay. It gets it out of the body. But so long we've been taught that, oh, if I'm crying, especially as men, we can get made fun of or whatever, boys don't cry, etc. And so we don't feel those. We just go to our head, which is safe, and think our feelings to justify them instead of actually feel them. And the cool thing is when you learn to start feeling, your body literally just gets rid of that energy and you're not carrying it around with you all the time anymore.
That's really powerful because I know that I've had a hard time. I'll do what you're saying. I'll be like, how are you feeling? I'm like, I'm feeling anger and I'm feeling frustrated and this person did that and start the stories, but I don't actually know where I'm feeling it. And doing a little bit of work and also observing some of the work that you've done, I've learned to start to tap into it. And it takes a while. It's a bit of work for me. I know like whenever I started to do this, I couldn't identify the feeling. And as you start to tune into it more, it does become easier.
Yeah.
And you can start to feel that. And I think locating it, what's like the next step in terms of you feel it, great. What do you do with that feeling?
That's the best part about it is like you really don't have to do anything with it. If you feel it, your body will process it and let go of it. I know you actually heard the girl's experience the very next day. She had, her father had passed away, and obviously she had a great relationship with him. And she expressed to me that if she would have seen that picture of her and her father, which was her favorite one, showed up on her memories the following morning, she goes, I probably wouldn't have even came to the session today. I would have been crying on my floor. And instead I looked at it and felt this loving feeling. So what happens is nothing changed in her life other than the fact that the emotional charge that she had around her father was processed. And now she could look at it in a healthy way instead of an unhealthy way. And so I think I always tell everybody the greatest lie that our mind tells us is that we have to figure it out to be okay. And the truth of the matter is we have to feel it out to be okay. So once you just feel it, it's amazing how much easier everything gets.
Isn't that crazy? Like, Isn't it just wild that we go on for so long in life thinking that this one thing's producing this result that actually isn't having a good result, but it's like, well, this is the only way I know. And then you have one little shift and you start to process it differently. And just the awareness of the feeling and where it is, and that lets your body, it's like our bodies are smarter than even sometimes like our brains are, right? Like we have an intellect.
Recorded everything that's ever happened to us. Like when we get into my recall during my latest experience, you realize like our brain still has all of it, like all of it. We're just so addicted to distraction in the current world that we think our memory is bad, or we think that our ability to focus is bad. We're just literally addicted to distraction. And what I will tell you is it's like a muscle. So that mind muscle connection is the same between our brain and our body and feeling. And the more that you practice it, you'll even realize like your language will change, not on purpose, but you'll start describing feelings instead of thoughts. And when you're doing that, you're processing it and it feels good. Like it literally feels like just like you feel after a workout.
I'm just laughing because like there's so many times I've heard people, they're like, I don't want to feel this. I almost want to like move on because they're afraid of what that's going to bring. They're afraid of going past the barrier of like discomfort. So they just like dismiss it. And like you said, they'll distract themselves. They'll get on Netflix or they'll get on their phones, and they never actually attach that thought to a feeling and allow it to process. So they're just walking around unprocessed trauma constantly in their life.
And they're using all kinds of energy to hold that down so they don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
What you realize is there's a reason why, I mean, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. Why do some people get infinitely more done and others don't? Well, I truly believe that the majority of people walking around on the earth are spending the majority of their energy trying to hold down those things that they're trying to avoid feeling. And if they would just feel them, it'll actually go away, and they'll realize that there's nothing to worry about after that.
Yeah, that's the crazy part. It's like, man, I'm so glad you brought that up. And it was really cool to see that experience in real time. So yeah, we can get more deep into that. I want to shift gears. So we've been talking about this retreat, this next thing you did. I wanted to just pave the way in terms of like what led you here. And one of my deepest fears when I was a kid, I remember I was in like a bedroom at a friend's house. It was a sleepover. I didn't really know the friend that well. And I had like a panic attack because I was afraid of the dark. Like literally his room was blacked out. Mine always had like a little nightlight or something. And I woke up screaming. I didn't know where I was trying to get out of this room. So like when you're talking about the experience, and we're going to get into that now, was like, man, I don't know if I could do that because I'm not afraid of the dark anymore. Like, you know, I love darkness when I'm sleeping now, but you immersed yourself for a week-long period of life where you're just in the dark, alone with your thoughts, nobody there, no distractions. What was this experience? And I guess first off, what turned you on to this? Like, why do you say, hey, that looks like a really cool thing to do? Go hang on the dark for 5 days and hopefully I survive and don't go crazy.
Yeah, good question. I don't think I was ever like not afraid or never not worried. I think I was all the way right up until I actually did it. Maybe that's what makes me different is just because I'm afraid doesn't mean I'm not going to try. And there's been a lot of other things that I've done that didn't produce results. And I had two friends that have done this, and both of them had amazing things to say about it. And that the feeling, or me even witnessing their life for the year after they did it and seeing the changes, I was like, there's got to be something to this. And so I signed up and got on a waiting list. And after 1 year, like they sent me an email and said, hey, do these dates? They emailed me in September and said, November 27th through December 5th, does that work for you? And I'm like, yes, yes. And I got all excited and they said, okay, well, we'll send you some more details when we get closer to the date. Well, about 30 days out, I'm like, hey, like, I don't even know what airport I'm supposed to fly in or whatever. And they replied back. They're like, oh, no, sorry, that's for 2025.
Oh,
And I was like, so I had already blocked off my calendar and set everything up with the work and the whole 9 yards. So I'm like, that's it. I'm not waiting a whole nother year. I've got this time. I'm going to figure it out. And so I got online and just started searching. And it took me about a week to get 2 or 3 options and to get one that fit those dates and go through with it. But yeah, right up until the actual experience, there was a whole lot of questions in my mind. And I actually journaled about the entire experience after I got out. And you're welcome to share that in the show notes with everybody of just how many things I realized I hadn't even considered or thought about until after the experience, after you go through it and realize how much you had avoided.
yeah. Well, we're definitely going to share that. And they shared the blog post with me. And I know you're going to continue like to journal the experience, which I think is really powerful to share. Not just like, I want to get into the tactics and like what you were doing during that week, because there's a lot to unpack there. But then the post event, the experience after, and we've been kind of going back and forth with like how you're feeling this month versus last month. And there's been so many incremental changes that you're not even aware that are going to take place. So before we go into that part, what is it like? Like, what are you doing each day from the time you got there to the time you left? What does a day in the dark look like? Obviously,
Yeah.
not much.
Yeah. You don't see much. Actually, you see nothing. I would say, to give you the Cliff Note version, I clearly knew like, hey, I want to do some self work and some deep thinking when I go in here. And I'm pretty methodical in my day to day life. Like I have a really good set of routines and I really enjoyed the structure of it. And so I had envisioned that's what I was going to do in there, just normal everyday stuff. And so when I first started trying to do that, I realized that like I wasn't getting anywhere. Like my mind was so scattered and I don't even notice it in my everyday day-to-day life because our lives are set up in a way to let us constantly be moving and doing all that other stuff. When you're in there, you have nothing to distract you.
So like no phones, no light of any kind. Like
No sound. There's a little bit of sound, but nobody's talking to you. No communication or any of that.
so you're not even communicating with the people there like every day. Like I'm fine, it's okay.
No,
You're
you
not
have a
checking in.
notepad that you can literally write on in the dark. You can't see it. You literally can't see anything. There was so many times I put my hand right in front of my face and would try to just to see because your brain doesn't want to comprehend that it's that dark. And yeah, no communication other than you write it on a notepad and you stick it in this like basically like a chute, and then they can get it from the other side, but that doesn't let any light in. And you can hear when they check it. Other than that, you have no concept of time, where it's at, what day it is. And
Yeah, so no beeping clocks like telling you it's been 12 hours or something.
no, there's literally nothing. So you have a room that has a bench, a bed, and then you have a bathroom that has a shower, a toilet, and a sink. And you feel your way around for everything. You can't see anything at all. So
Man, I have so many questions, and I'm trying to pick like the best ones. And
Yeah.
so
Let me
yeah.
give you the quick Cliff Notes version, and then that might give you a lot of opportunities to chat. So the first day when I was really trying to nail down, like, okay, I'm going to do some deep work. I'm here for 5 days. I break down my life in my physical body, my nutrition and health, then my relationship with God or a higher power, and my relationship with myself, and then my relationship with other people, and then my business or what I do for money. And so those four areas, I thought each day I'm going to really try to dive deep into where I've created my beliefs and what stories I'm telling to get the results that I have. And that's kind of like in my head, that's the way I had formulated how this was going to go. And what I realized was that first day, I literally couldn't sit there and just focus on one thing. And it took me about 3 or 4 hours to what I would say was a mentally detox from distraction. Like you think about your phone, you think about looking at your computer, you think about like all the things that you do like 24/7 for these dopamine hits. And in there, you don't have any of it. Like you're literally shut off from the world. And so now you actually pay attention and you can see how scattered you are. And so that first day was literally like an exercise of squirrel, squirrel, no, come back. Squirrel, squirrel, no, come back. And until finally I was able to just sit there and like a deep meditation. And so I got tired, went to sleep. And that's the other thing, like the first couple of days, like you sleep way more than what you realize. And I didn't know that either until I got out. So in my journal, I shared, she said, yeah, I'll bring your food a little later tomorrow because typically people sleep a little longer. Well, I wake up at 5:30 every morning and get going. And so for me, maybe she would bring breakfast like 8 or 9. I found out 5 days later that she really brought it like at 2 p.m., but I had just woke up. So, and this is on Pacific Standard Time, and I'm typically in East Coast. So it was like I slept till 5 p.m. the next day.
Wow. How many
Yeah.
total hours is that around?
Uh, um,
Like 16 hours
I
or?
went to bed. Well, I got there inside the dark room around 8 p.m. after sunset. So I would say I probably fell asleep by 9. So yeah, 3 hours to midnight and then 12, 15. Yeah, close to 18 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had no clue. Like no clue. I just thought it was like a normal sleep and didn't realize it till after. So needless to say, that day was quite short and I fell asleep. So my mind still knew what my bedtime was. And I went to sleep after 4 or 5 hours. And the next day I thought, all right, cool. I've kind of went through that process and I started getting all these phantom pains. And what I realized was they were things that I had, again, going back to our original conversation about feeling things instead of the stories. My mind wanted to make a story right away about my hand feeling like it was on fire. And instead of doing that, I knew enough to say, okay, I'm actually just going to observe and feel what I'm feeling, like not chase it, not try to make it go away, not do any of that. And what happened was I started realizing like, oh, I could bring up a thought of something that had happened and it would produce a feeling in my body. And I could sit there and literally just observe it until it kind of like processed its way out and it felt better. It was almost like I was gaining momentum doing that. And so that second day, I literally laid on that bed for, I don't know how many hours, probably 6, 8 hours, thinking of like, oh, this traumatic experience, oh, this fun experience, oh, this memory, whatever. And I would literally just pay attention to whatever came up. And then I would just observe it until it went away. And I literally did that for hours and hours, process all these feelings out. And I can tell you that like the amount of energy that our body has or that it develops all by itself when all of a sudden you get this flow that's not inhibited by all these distractions and other things that are taking us out of actually feeling. Yeah, it's a magical energy. Some magical energy.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine the first day of like digital detoxing, noticing your brain being scattered, notice at once the desire to be distracted, like just going through that is like a purge in itself. The other thing too you mentioned was like sleep. And how did you know? Like, I mean, the first day, it sounds like you slept a lot, but like, how did you know when your body was tired that it was time for bed? Because it's so weird not having a clock and not feeling like, because you're not really doing much. I know you're meditating. You also said you're, doing a little body weight workout and stuff like that. But like, when did you know it's time to go to bed? And like, when you woke up, did you know like, oh, I'm good, or I should go back to sleep? Like,
Yeah, it's funny. So that I think when you asked that question, I was trying to think through that. 100%. Like we have this mental construct of, oh, when this clock goes off, that's what I'm supposed to do. In there, you don't have any of that. So there's no supposed to do's anything. It's literally, I'm here with my thoughts and nothing else. And it's not going to be anything else for days. So let's just be present. I guess that's really the difference is when you're in there and you have zero distraction, there's no way to not be present with exactly what's going on right then because nothing else is distracting you. Your brain can't go anywhere except for a thought, but you can observe it because you're not distracted by anything other than your thought.
what about like, did ideas come to you and then you're like, oh crap, I wish I obviously can write, but sometimes like writing in the dark, I'm sure it wasn't that legible, but maybe it was. Was there any messages that came to you that after you're looking through your notes and you're like, oh man, I'm so glad that I captured that?
Yeah. And so I will tell you, because I'm going again in May. I have a 7-day one scheduled in May. I when I got out, I said, all right, I was already going to do the one that I had already scheduled that I had waited for the 2 years. And when I got out, I said, I'm going to do it one more time in between and I'm going to document this. And I actually bought the domain, the Darkroom Diaries. And so I'm going to just publish it, each time I went through that. But yeah, this time when I go back, I'm going to take a voice recorder, obviously with no light on it, but I'm going to take a voice recorder because the thing that you realize in there is that your memory is way better and your thinking is highly leveraged. Like I remember going, wow, it's so clear. It's so obvious. But then the moment you get out or 2 days later, your brain does its normal thing and tries to scatter it. So I have some like little cliff notes from each day that were good, but nothing, I don't think anything compared to what I will get this next time because I will have way less to detox from distraction. And then also I'll have the voice recorder where I can put down a lot more thoughts and then kind of dissect them coming out of it later on.
Yeah, what was interesting too is like you're activating senses that are never fully always on. Like when you're in the dark, you know that your eyes are trying to make something of the dark. And then all of a sudden you're reliant on feel more because obviously you have to feel around the room and you have to pick up utensils and like even tasting things must be a little bit different in terms of food that you're ingesting because you're not looking at it, you're not getting that visual connection. So was that something you noticed? Was it like different? Was it better?
It was 100x better. I literally can say I don't think I've ever tasted food like that. And the crazy thing was every bite, because you literally can't see anything. You stab it and then it's like it's in your mouth and you taste the flavor and the juices. And so what I had was pineapple and oranges or apple chunks the first day. And yeah, the pineapple was like unbelievable, like unbelievably good. So I told you about the second day where I was processing all those feelings. On the third day, I ended up having like the best meditation I've ever had in my entire life. Like I meditate every day, twice a day. I do it for between 10 and 15 minutes each time. And I've never had a really long meditation. In there, I got into this place where it was hours. And I just felt like I didn't need to go anywhere else and I didn't need to be anywhere else. And it was me observing instead of me like being. I don't know how to describe that any other way other than it was like I was separate from my body and I was just observing what was going on instead of me having to like process feeling it as myself.
The way I would relate it to, it's like you get to have a conversation with yourself as well, like not just maybe not meditation, but you actually get to talk to yourself and you're not getting anyone else's input to distract you from the things that you've been potentially neglecting, resisting, pushing down, and it's all able to surface now without these big distractions.
Yeah, that is very true. Don't think I think because of the distraction, we don't get to go deep enough to understand where our subconscious has formed these stories. And so most of us are walking around with stories in our head that we've never revisited because we're on autopilot instead of being able to observe them. And I think the length of time that I was in there allowed my brain to, one, detox from the distraction, and then my body had to process that as well because our bodies are addicted to the chemicals that our brain produces. And so I went through that. I got into that really deep meditation on the third day. And then later that night, I was sitting on the edge of the bed and my brain literally recreated the entire room exactly the way that it was and turned the lights on. And I remember going like, oh, wow, like this is crazy. Like I can see everything. Like my brain didn't want it to be dark anymore. And so it turned the lights on and is created this image.
Did you think the lights were on?
I did. Well, I knew there was no lights in there, but it was like my mind,
your brain was like figuring
the light on it so that I could see where I was going to go. And I got up and went to walk over to the bench where I do the meditation, and 3 steps forward, and I walked right into a concrete wall and realized, oh, okay, this is just a visual representation of the room. It's not the actual room, and kind of got reoriented. But that happened 2 or 3 times over the next 24 hours until I finally realized, like, okay, my mind is playing tricks on me, and I still need to walk with my hands in front of me.
That's wild, right? Like your brain's trying to make sense of it so much to the point that it's giving you like these mirages of sorts. And
it 100% was, because I could see everything in the room, and it was exactly like I could even see where the yoga mat was in front of the bench, everything. And then when I went to walk towards it, it clearly wasn't there because I walked straight into the wall. But that's our brain. That's the other part, is that I realized if your brain's not okay with something, it will just make it up to be okay. And so how many things are we just making up to be okay without realizing it? Clearly that one bit me a couple of times because I walked into a concrete wall. I couldn't do anything other than that. But there's a lot of other things in our life that we're walking around with, believing are true, that our brain is just made up because that's what it needs to do to feel comfortable.
Yeah. And how many concrete walls are we walking into in life that we think that the brain's making this the reality, the truth, and then we hit the friction, the resistance of like, oh, it's not true. It's not what I wanted. It's an interesting parallel to being in the dark. I never even thought about that. That's a really good observation. Yeah. One other question I have to ask, and it's kind of a weird question, but like, how is it going to the bathroom in there?
It's fine. Yeah. You sit down. I mean, for guys, we don't normally have to sit down, but yeah, you can't see anything. So you don't want to, you want to keep the room clean because there's no way to clean up either that you don't. So I didn't want to miss the toilet. So yeah,
you wouldn't know till after anyways, but
yeah.
Did you ever get to the point you're like, I need out, it's enough, I'm done? And how did you, because obviously you went through the whole thing.
Yeah. So I did. And the stats are a little over 50% of people don't stay the whole time. They walk out early. I got to that point. So your brain naturally produces DMT in this experience. And typically it happens on the 3rd day is what they say. I had told the lady that I was probably going to fast, and I would just let her know with the notepad on the 2nd day. And I've done long fasts before. I don't have any problem with it. It was, to me, it seemed like a natural time to go ahead and do that. What I didn't realize, and what I will do differently the 2nd time to see the different effect, was the longer I fasted, the stronger that DMT experience got. In my head, like this is, again, I'm realizing as I'm describing to you, I was going to say on the evening of the 3rd day, but I have no idea if it was evening or morning or midday or whatever. Okay. In my mind, it felt like the evening of the 3rd day. I realized this DMT started happening, and it was like, okay, I see these flashes and like different images, but it was pretty mild, and it wasn't anything. It was nothing like the psychedelic experiences that I've had at that point. And so I was able to go to sleep that third night. Well, the fourth day, it started getting stronger, and it was kind of like building. It was almost constant to the point where on the fourth day, I tried to do several of the things that I did on the third day and couldn't because it's just distracting. And like if I sat there and worked into my breath work, it got way more pronounced. And so I just couldn't focus like I had the other days. And then on the end of the fourth day, I had even wrote on the notepad to put it in the thing, I feel complete, but I didn't put it in the chute. And so when she came and checked it, it wasn't in there and she left. And so I was like, well, whatever. It's one more day. It's not going to be that big of a deal. And what happened was on the fifth day, that DMT experience was really, really strong to the point that I couldn't do anything else. Like it was just like nonstop images and visuals. And I do remember walking over to the wall or walking over to the door and putting my hands on the door and going, man, I want to walk out and get some food so that this will stop. And I knew that if I did that, like what I was going through was really brutal at the time, but I knew if I did that, like I just wouldn't have been okay, that I didn't stick it out. And so my experience on this one was the fast created a totally different experience than what I would have had if I would have chose to eat each day. And in the wisdom of that whole process, I realized I'm really glad that I went through that really, really super hard day, because there's other things in my life that I was like, I don't know if I really still have that same amount of drive and ability to put up with whatever, to do whatever is necessary to accomplish what I want to accomplish. And it was very obvious to me after that no, I still have it, because I wanted to end that experience so bad. And I remember even saying to myself, like in my head, I'm like, okay, yeah, my mind is literally trying to tell me that I'm going mad so that I will walk out, but it's not. And having this whole discussion inside of my brain, understanding exactly what it was trying to do. It was trying to tell me stories to get me to do something else. And I realized now when I'm out, it's like, man, our brain does that all the time too. It tells us this story to get what it wants, even if that's not what serves us or serves our best purpose. And so you kind of touched on it earlier. You said push through that initial distraction period or the initial resistance. And I think one of the things that I've come to realize is there is a natural gatekeeper that our brain uses to find out if we really want it or if we don't really want it. And that is distraction and that initial resistance. And what I've realized, and the reason why I say that is because it's funny when I go, oh, I'm ready to sit down and really tackle this project, I get the weirdest, oh, I'm hungry. Oh, I need to get water first. Oh, I need to go to the bathroom first. Oh, you come up with all these different things, and you keep doing that and never push through that resistance. So this project that you could have done a really good job in 30 minutes ends up taking an hour and a half, and it's been broke up in between all these other things. I think that's how a lot of our life is playing out. And the more that I shed these old beliefs and these addictions to distraction, I realize I'm a lot more focused. The work that I'm doing is much better. And I can now go, oh, I feel the resistance. No, I'm just going to sit here. Like, I'm not going to get up and get that water. I'm not going to. And then when you stop doing that, your body stops using that as an excuse to not do your thing.
Yeah, I mean, everybody struggles with that. There's been oftentimes I've experienced that too. And what you mentioned is like, if you think about marathon racers, like that last mile or the last physical exertion or that last cut, if you're doing bodybuilding, is like one of the hardest things. And it's interesting when you don't have a physical component of like pushing your body, but really you're pushing your mind. Your body is like probably rejuvenated in a lot of ways because it hasn't necessarily done that much physical activity. So right now you're just battling with your mind, and it's starting to create these stories. It's starting to give out on you because it doesn't have the mental stamina that it needs to push through this. And the fact that you did most likely has a profound effect on how you operate today, and kind of leads me to like, the end of the experience. When you left that experience, what was the first day like? And then what's been that transformation you've been feeling throughout the past couple months?
Yeah, so the most profound like awareness was right after I got out. The host lady took me, we walked out to this cliff and watched the sunrise. And she started sharing her relationship with their family and some of the struggles that were there. And I told her about the story of the last 13 days that I had spent with my dad in hospice. And I probably told the story at least 30 or 40 times and have never had any emotion whatsoever around it because I didn't have a close relationship with my dad. It was very, very compartmentalized. And again, probably a lot of it, I just chose not to feel it. And so when I was explaining to her this, when I was telling her the story, I was sobbing. And the part that was really unique, or what was weird to me, was I never thought about it one single time when I was in there.
Really?
At all. And so now that there was such a visceral, emotional response to this story that I was telling, I was like, wow, something changed. I've certainly processed things. Just because I don't remember it or just because I don't have a recollection of it doesn't mean that like there's not internal change happening. And so the way that I can describe what my experience has been like afterwards is more of that. It's like you don't even realize the change is happening until all of a sudden an experience you go, oh wow, I feel totally different in this environment where before I wouldn't feel like this. And you go, oh, okay, something's changing. It's like you don't realize it till after the fact because it's not this like clear as day, like, oh, okay, now I feel this or now I feel that. It's been more of like the way that I try to describe it so people can picture it is if we built up all these layers of stories and beliefs, and because your brain can see where you formed them, it's like recataloging. It's like recataloging your life to go, oh yeah, those stories don't serve me anymore. And they kind of like dry up and fall off. And so it's been like in the beginning, it was every week. There would be like 2 days of like really, really vivid dreams at night. And then I would just feel really good, like this like cleansing. And so I'm sure like I was processing stuff, in those dreams that then, I wake up and go, wow, I feel amazing. And so now I'm like way more present at work. I'm way more focused. And that has continued to get better and better. And like we were talking about just before I got on, just the last 2 nights have been that experience again. And I don't know how long that's going to happen for, but I'm really glad every time it is, because every single time I've continued to feel better and show up more present and more deliberately and with purpose. And so I think that there's a lot more to come, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. I mean, first off, I think when we first met, and we were doing NAD, and I was like, this is my guy, because like we have this in common. You're a completely different person. Like, you're still nice, and there wasn't anything like abrupt that I didn't like. But when I saw you after the experience and we got to talk, and I'm like Matt, it's like really changed. Like I couldn't even pinpoint what it was, but there was a lightness to you. There was this new sense of being, just your presence overall. And then, obviously the retreat had a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
And I was just like, man, like that, I it's interesting when you see it versus just hear someone's experience. Like had you not even told me, I wouldn't have been able to know what changed, but you just seem like a completely new person.
Yeah, like even my business partners have said the same thing. They're like, "Man, it's different. Like it's different." I'm like, "I know, I feel different. I feel lighter. I am way more efficient and productive. What took me 10, 12 hours to get done, now I get done in 6 or 8, and I believe that that'll keep getting better. I really do. It's like there's no reason for me to not, because I keep realizing I'm like more aware of distraction and how many different places that shows up. Our brain will go to, oh, I want this structure. So we realize it in relation to that structure, but we don't realize how many other unconscious places. And you kind of mentioned it when you said how many other places in our life is our brain giving us this picture with the lights on. We think that it's all normal, but we just haven't walked into the wall yet. So we are operating as if it's true. We don't even know that it's not true until we actually walk into the wall. Well, what I can say is, knowing that, like, I'm purposely trying to walk into the walls as fast as possible and shatter my preconceived beliefs, because I know that every single time that happens, it gets better on the other side. And so really that I think what our brain has done is it's created those things for us to feel safe and secure, and like, because we can relate it to different things. But really what it's done is it's created a prison, because every time that I expand those beliefs and walk into the wall and shatter the belief of what my mind says is true, it's always better on the other side. And so like I realize, the beliefs that I have are literally the limiting ones that I created when I was this little kid trying to be safe, instead of who I am now as an adult. I don't have to worry about, other people hurting me or the different things that our brain, has literally found confirmation bias around our whole life to create this construct.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of newfound freedom in so many ways. And there's probably more questions that I have. I have a lot more questions, but I think I want to save it for like a follow-up. So I know you're going to go back. I'd love for you to come back on maybe a couple months after you do the next one. For those people interested, like, I know you're not running the retreats yet. Who knows? Maybe one day Matt's going to have his own retreat center here and just go completely off on a tangent. Which ones did you do? Which ones would you recommend? And who do you think's a good fit? Maybe who's not a good fit for this?
Yeah, the one that it's called blisshaven.yoga. It's down in Mexico. You can go online and just search dark retreats, and there's a lot of them. What I will tell you is I don't think the location is really that critical, because, again, the area that I went in was really super beautiful. And I was there for 7 days, and I literally saw about 3 hours of daylight until it got dark the first day. And then the day that I got out, I watched the sunrise and then traveled home and did the rest. So it's not near as much about where you're at as it is the mindset of like maybe why you're doing it. And for me, my thought process was, and this is what my envision was when I was going there, was that it was going to be me and my thoughts. I couldn't avoid anything. And I would just have to make peace with it, with, all the things that I hadn't resolved. And I can tell you, it didn't really play out that way, because it wasn't as near as structured as how I thought it was going to play out in my mind. It's very much, there is no structure in the dark, and there is no time frame that you have to accomplish anything in. And so I would say, man, you just got to be okay with not knowing, because in the end, it was okay, and I'm fine. And if anything, I think I'm way better than fine. I think the amount of time that I spend in there, I'm going to get back exponentially in my experience of life and quality of life and presence with life, to the tune of the fact that I said, oh no, I'm going to go again in 6 months and see, I want to continue this level of progress without kind of settling back into what used to be familiar. And yeah, that's what I would say. I would say if you really want to make peace with your thoughts and know that you can handle whatever, that's a good place to do it. And the truth of the matter is, we can all handle it. We just don't think we can because we haven't pushed through that resistance. And in there, staying through to the very end proved a lot of things to me and has opened up a whole new world.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, because you did a 5-day, now you're going to do a 7-day, so you're pushing the boundaries even more next time.
Yeah.
What's cool too is like for anyone listening, and something that I was interested in this, it's a it's a natural, safe environment, although it can feel daunting. It's a practice of surrendering, and you're not reliant on if you don't want to do ayahuasca, if you don't want to do substances to elicit this type of state. This is like a good alternative, I think. In addition to if you want to do it, that's cool. But like the fact that it's so simplistic, you know what I mean? It's so elegantly simplistic of just like you're in the dark and you have these new sensations and you're doing detox all at the same time. Like it is really sophisticated in the way that this small experience to some level, because like you're not really doing that much, right? Like you said, it doesn't matter where you go, you're just in the dark for 5 days or 7 days or 3, but like you have profound realizations and the compound effect of that over time. I just think it's like if someone's willing to do it, it sounds like a great experience. You sold me. Like I don't know when, I don't know where, but I am committed to doing this at some point. And this is coming from a guy that used to be like scared shitless of being in the dark myself. So I think it's going to be a good practice for me as well.
Yeah, I will say I've done all the other experiences. I mean, I've done like an enormous amount of things. And to me, this is the easiest with the most profound effect. The other ones, the psychedelic experiences, there's so much integration and so much trying to make sense of things that you saw or felt in those experiences. And in the end, like I firmly believe that a lot of it, our mind just made up stories to be okay, especially after what I went through now. Looking back on those experiences, I can tell you that I've got way more from being in the dark for that extended period than I've got from any other experience that I've done. And I don't feel like I'm even close to the finish from it yet. Because like I said, even as early as or as recent as the last couple of days, I feel like I processed a whole bunch more, and it's very gentle. It's really like that stuff is, yeah, as I'm sharing it with you right now, I'm still having realizations that yeah, it's still processing it in the dark when I'm sleeping, when all that, like, it's like, that's my body's outlet to get rid of that stuff. And then I just feel better. And so, yeah, I'm very excited about going next time. And I'm going to take a voice recorder. So there was a lot of things that obviously we can't go through in 1 hour call, with 121 hours in the dark. But yeah, that's a profound experience, and I would recommend anyone do it.
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you for sharing the experience, the vulnerability, all the lessons learned. And we're going to have all the show notes with links to find out more about what Matthew's up to in his next dark experiments and everything else you have going on. And yeah, I mean, this show is really all about pushing the boundaries of yourself and learning new ways to do that. So very much in line with the content we're putting out there. So Matthew, thank you so much for being on the show today. We appreciate it. Any final words?
No, like, thanks for having me. And if anyone has any questions, part of the reason why I journaled what I did and kind of said, I'm going to document this, is because it was very difficult to find anyone that had done that. Obviously, dark retreats are becoming pretty popular because you hear about it a lot, but I couldn't find more than, a paragraph of like, oh, it was this, or oh, it was really cool, or whatever. And so me writing down what my experience was each day, I think that will provide people the comfort to realize like, oh, okay, there is going to be some weird things. Oh, there is going to be some not normal, or it's not going to turn out the way that I thought it was. But in the end, it's all okay. And in the end, it's actually way better than okay. I will say that it's not life-changing, but transformational. So I don't feel like this, like, oh, I'm a different person, but I feel like I've literally become someone that I really genuinely like and love, and I'm excited about moving into the next phase of my life.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. Like it's so powerful when you can read other people's experiences, especially if you have doubts or resistance of something, and knowing that you're not affiliated to something as well. Like you have nothing to gain from it, just the experience itself that you're sharing. And I would challenge you on the life change, and I think it has been life changing. I mean, you haven't seen all the changes that's taken place, but loving yourself more, liking who you are, how that's going to translate in your life, your relationships. I mean, I think it's just the beginning for you. And yeah, man, I would love for you to come on second episode to do a follow up on this and see what you learned from an additional session. So if you're willing, we'll get you back on the show.
Sounds good. Absolutely.
Awesome, guys. Well, thanks for listening to today's episode, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.